So we've got 30 minutes flat to do our presentation, so I'm going to race 1-3 exactly. So I'll race straight into it. As Barbara said in her introduction, a lot of my practice in recent years has focused on zones, what I call zones of ambiguity, which in my case has focused a lot on the ambiguous border between life and death and the sort of unknowability of the edges between life and death. So I'm going to start with a remarkable story that was published in the Lancet, Letters to the Lancet, the medical journal, in the year 2000, submitted by a team of doctors from Norway. And I'll read the first one of the opening paragraphs. On May the 20th, 1999, at 6:20 p.m, an experienced female off-piste skier, aged 29 years, fell while skiing down a waterfall gully. She and her two companions were junior registrars at the local hospital, trained in CPR and equipped for extreme conditions. The woman became wedged between rocks and overlying thick ice, and the space was continuously flooded by water. Her skis prevented her from sliding and served as a grip by which her two companions tried to extract her. 7 minutes later, her friends called the emergency medical dispatch centre at Narvik Hospital by mobile telephone. The woman struggled under the ice for 40 minutes. At 7 p.m, she had stopped moving. Now, some of you, this was a very high-profile case in the media, and some of you may have come across it, but the story goes on that she was, rescue teams arrived, she was extracted from the ice. At 7:39, the teams arrived, which was over an hour after she'd gone under the ice. She was airlifted to Tromsø University Hospital, where she was rushed into an operating theatre. And around 3 hours later, after an extensive resuscitation protocol, her heart started to go into fibrillation, and then 15 minutes later her heart started to beat in the normal rhythm. And she then had to go through another extensive rehabilitation process, but within a number of 2 months or so, she had regained all of her intellectual faculty, she was back at work, she was even hiking and skiing again. So she'd been clinically dead for approximately 3 hours. And her case, her name is Helen Pynor, and as I said, some of you might have read the case. The case illustrates this incredible ambiguity that has emerged in the sort of borders between life and death, and which has essentially always been there. It's in the sort of the nature of living material, but new and emerging resuscitation techniques are making this ambiguity much more obvious. So from 2010 to 2013, I undertook a long-term artistic collaboration with artist Peter Clancy, who's a Melbourne-based artist, and we undertook a project that was exploring, or at least started from the premise of exploring organ transplantation and the kinds of ambiguities that arise in organ transplantation. We had two components to the project. One was to work with a community of people that had actually experienced organ transplantation. So we worked with a Melbourne-based community organisation and recruited people who'd had experiences of transplantation, either donors, recipients, close family members, and we choreographed an underwater performance in which they were the performers. Alongside that, we did quite an extensive research project at Symbiotica at the University of Western Australia, Griffith University in Queensland, and King's College London, where we developed a heart perfusion system that could perfuse fresh pig hearts obtained from an abattoir so that they could be supported to beat outside the body of the pig for some extended time after the death of the pig. I've got a video to show you a little bit about how that worked. Making that work, we had to engage quite extensively with abattoirs to get hold of fresh hearts that were in good enough condition to use for this work. And essentially we had to be on the sort of shop floor of abattoirs because we had to get the hearts within about 3 minutes of the death of the animal. And we had a really remarkable experience at one of these abattoirs where for the first time I really understood it at a visceral level that death is not a moment in time as death certificates suggest, but is actually an extended durational process that happens over a very long period of time. And I'm going to read a short quote that I used in the chapter the book we've just been talking about that spoke about that experience. We're wedged into a corner of the abattoir by a worker with a blowtorch, scorching hairs off freshly killed pig carcasses as they move past us on the conveyor belt. The main floor is a soupy mix of water, blood, and small pieces of pig tissue streaming steadily toward floor drains. The combined noise of tumbling machinery, the conveyor belt, and water jets is deafening, and we shout to be heard. The mass of organs is flung onto the concrete floor at our feet, and the pig carcass they came from is inching away from us on the conveyor belt. We scrabble through the warm mass, but stop when we see the pig's heart, a trembling piece of rhythmic wetness, still beating, and the intestines convulsing in purposeful peristaltic waves, like a pile of slow-moving worms, continuing to digest food that no longer has a body to nourish. And it was really the first moment where I got that. It was this incredible sort of moment where we're in the middle of oral chaos of sound and the assault of the senses and dead pig bodies sort of streaming past. But it was in that moment where I suddenly actually got it that death happens slowly. And the project that I'm working on now is exploring that from another angle and if you like, a more microscopic level, looking at the sort of cellular level of the liminal life-death border. So at the moment I'm based at the Max Planck Institute for Molecular Cell Biology and Genetics in Dresden, in Germany, and I'm collaborating with regeneration biologist Dr. Jochen Rink. And we have some overlapping interests around this whole ambiguity, him from the perspective of regeneration, me from the perspective of the philosophical and ethical implications of this liminality. And we started with a very simple idea that we wanted to test, which was whether we could find living cells inside chicken meat that we obtained from the supermarket. So is there essentially still life in meat from the supermarket? And that involved quite a long process of learning skills in cell culture, etc. And my first training was in science. So I have a degree in cell and molecular biology, which was hugely helpful in terms of negotiating the learning process. But I did have to learn those skills from scratch. But I'm in the thick of this research now, so I don't have a lot of images of the work. It's still in progress. This is an image of the supermarket where I eventually got the chicken meat. But so it's a fairly low-grade German supermarket, and I really had to go through a very systematic process of obtaining chickens from an abattoir outside of Dresden, testing to see whether I could find living cells in freshly dead chickens, so to speak, and then sort of extending the time point. And it was a sort of it actually needed some scientific methodology in the process to get footholds, and then also obviously it has an artistic dimension as well. So literally just before 2 weeks ago, I finally got to the point of doing this extraction from the supermarket chicken, and in fact was able to get living fibroblast cells. So at the moment I'm culturing these cells in an incubator back in Dresden. They're growing and dividing in my absence. But the other part of the project, as well as sort of demonstrating that that was possible, and for me that's quite mind-blowing by itself, the fact that if I go to a supermarket and buy a chicken, there's still living entities inside that meat. But also the other side of it was, how do you represent such life within an artistic context? What are the issues about representation and how you actually present that form of liminal life, if you like? So what I've been doing at the Institute is working with differential interference contrast microscopy and doing extended time-lapse video, still images taken over a time point of up to 60 hours to show the cells growing and dividing and moving around. And that's been quite revolutionary for me as well, because I actually had no idea how cells behaved at that level. It's a form of microscopy that's extremely three-dimensional, and the cells are incredibly interactive in terms of shooting out philopodia to other cells and connecting and then pulling apart, and it's very easy to project a kind of psychological narrative onto the cells, that they're sort of sucking up together and then they're pushing apart, and there's a lot of movement going on. So at the moment I'm playing around with languages of time, movement and stillness, so working between photography and video and looking at how those media might help me to not simply present a scientific video, but bring in another interpretive layer to the way this form of life is represented. It's also involved, once again, working with an abattoir, this time not having to witness the actual killing. So I'm slightly one step removed. I'm in the next room, so I can hear the whole soundscape of what's going on. But then they bring the chicken through and pull out the innards, and that's slightly easier to witness than the pig scenario. So the other element of this research is that which I haven't yet started, I'm in the sort of mid stages of this project, is to talk to people that have experienced clinical death. So going back to the paper that I started with, and Anna Bagelong's case, looking at, there's an increasing interest and research being done on the survival of clinical death, and because of these new resuscitation technologies, more and more people are surviving clinical death, and a certain proportion of them are reporting that they remember events that happened during their own resuscitation. It's an extraordinary claim, and in some cases it's been verified by medical staff who were involved in the resuscitation, but it's still a very grey area, and it's still contended and not believed by a lot of people. But the other area of my research will be to work with people that have had such experiences and collaborate with a choreographer and a sound artist and create a video performance work that engages those people, and have this work in some kind of dialogue with the liminal chicken cells that are still somehow alive. So, I mean, it intersects with a lot of very deeply puzzling and troubling medical, ethical questions around things like organ transplantation, the declaration of death, which I guess, as most of you know, was changed in response to the definition of death was changed in response to organ transplantation technologies. And it's still very contended whether organ donors are really dead. I mean, there are all kinds of ambiguities in the way that they are treated by the medical system, because at some level they're named to be dead, and at another level they're treated as if they're still patients and still alive, and the ambiguity plays out very powerfully with that, but also with resuscitation and the increasingly blurred line that that's generating as well. So I think that's all I have time for, but that's a brief introduction. Thank you.